In general, the coverage of Zohran Mamdani here has been abysmal in the sense that there is no nuance, there's no ambiguity. He is portrayed in an extremely one-dimensional way, and pretty much all Israelis, or certainly Israeli Jews, are convinced that he is the enemy of the Jewish people, and anti-Semitic and anti-Zionist and every bad thing. In fact, they generally think that all he does as mayor of New York is hate Jews. That is really my best characterization of the coverage of Zohran Mamdani here. Now, why is the Likud doing this? The Likud is, first of all, run by Mr. Netanyahu, whose general coalition of parties is not doing well in surveys. And as a result, it seems that there has been a strategic decision to appeal as much as possible to very core themes and the base being roughly 40%, a little bit more or less, who support the coalition in the present. And the core themes are the classic themes that Netanyahu likes to run on, which is fear, the whole world is against us, everybody's turning on the Jewish people and Israel, and I am the protector. The world is black and white. It's a binary of enemies and us. And we have to protect ourselves, and I'm the only one who can do that. And so the billboard does not only include Zohran Mamdani, it includes all sorts of other, bad actors who are the head of terror groups, frankly, that Israel has been fighting for the last few years, trying to portray him as one of them. And I think it also ties into Netanyahu's case that he has frequently made, which is that radical fundamentalist Islam is not only Israel's problem, but is coming for the entire world. That's a core theme of his. He would probably be very happy that I'm repeating it here.
That is actually something I really am interested in, because that's where we see convergence between Netanyahu's messaging and messaging across far-right groups in Europe, in the US. It's this fixation on the risk of Islam. Is it fair to say that there's been a shift in Israeli political rhetoric from the sort of traditional national security framework towards this very Islamophobic one? Or is that a theme that has always sort of been present in domestic politics?
I mean, I do think it's always been there at some level, especially since the rise of Hamas. Since the early 1990s, well, as Hamas was established in the late 1980s, but I think it became really, a major oppositional force within the Palestinian society and began undertaking suicide bombs in the name of Islamism in the mid-1990s. And so I think it's been there as part of Israel's general understanding of some of the threats that it faces. But of course, Mr. Netanyahu has used it very significantly over the years. And yes, probably more so in recent years. I can think in particular of, well, certainly in his themes arguing against the Islamic Republic of Iran, he has used that theme over and over again for decades, but it was mostly focused on his arguments for why the world should do their best to stop Iran. I think that what's changed is that he's broadened it out to show it as something that threatens the entire world. And it's not entirely new, but certainly in recent years. Another example I can think of, which in a way is a turning point, was in his 2015 political campaign when he put out a very short 40-second ad in which he tried to conflate Israeli left-wingers with ISIS. And you remember, ISIS was really still terrorizing the Middle East at that point. And it was a very clever ad because it basically drew a clear link between the left and radical Islamic terror. And that was the scariest thing we knew about at the time. And so he has been working on these themes for a while. But, these things are like a gift. They keep on giving, and he takes them to new heights each time.
And actually that conflation between the left and sort of radical Islam is one that we're also seeing here in Europe. Is this kind of messaging, is it a vote winner in Israel? What can we tell from the polling about whether this is working, whether Netanyahu is recovering in the election polls, or if he's just sort of consolidating a narrower base?
No, frankly, none of it is working. I mean, you could say that it's working in the sense that he has maintained his position as one of the biggest parties. The Likud is getting between 21 and 23 mandates or parliamentary seats out of 120, putting it in either first but lately second place, because another opposition party has tied and pulled ahead over the last month or so, and that's the party of former Chief of Staff Gadi Eisenkot. So he's actually losing his top position by just a small margin. I wouldn't say that's the final word. I've seen this before in elections where another party seems to rival the Likud, but then doesn't actually do as well as it was expected to. We had that situation in 2015. So you could say that these themes are successful in the sense of keeping him at least where he is. But remember, where he is for the last 2 years of polling has been incredibly stable, probably maddeningly stable from his perspective, because again, even though his party is coming in as one of the biggest, first or second place, his coalition is unable to win more than 51 or 52 or maybe 53 seats in the mainstream surveys. Only the right-wing advocacy surveys show him his coalition getting a majority, and even among the two pollsters that are really committed to right-wing outlets, one of them has shown his coalition declining to below 60 out of 120 parliamentary seats. So no, I would not say these messages are doing what he would like them to do, which is bring back voters who defected after the 2022 elections from voting for his coalition. Final word, I should say that polls are not the final story here, because we have coalition bargaining, and the coalition bargaining is going to be very intense both before and after the election. So Netanyahu is a master of orchestrating the political system. The parties that he is in coalition with now may not be the parties he's able to rally to his side, possibly after the elections, but it does look increasingly unlikely.
Thank you. Now, another figure that I want to talk about here is Amichai Chikli, also a Likud, very outspoken campaigner. He's the minister responsible for fighting anti-Semitism. And yet he has embraced figures like Tommy Robinson or parties including Germany's AfD, Spain's Vox. These are movements with roots or associations in the far right and, in some cases, neo-Nazism. Essentially, traditions that have a history of anti-Semitism. I wonder if that contradiction troubles any sections of Israeli society.
Well, I should start by saying it certainly doesn't trouble Mr. Netanyahu, because I think he originated that tactic. He was cozying up to Viktor Orban, of blessed memory as the longtime leader of Hungary, and at a time when Orban was basically trafficking in anti-Semitic themes and railing against George Soros as some sort of playing into the conspiracy theories about Jews and money running the world. And Netanyahu was not bothered by any of that, and certainly has thrown in his lot with the far right. In fact, I'm going to speculate a little bit that Amichai Chikli was not clever enough to come up with this strategy on his own, and was probably following the lead of Netanyahu's longtime practice of making common cause with the far right over what you mentioned before: Islamophobia, anti-immigration, a sort of sense of, the national in-group is all that matters, and everybody else is, an outsider trying to destroy our life. I mean, nationalists traffic in nationalism, and I think that they see themselves as kindred spirits, while downplaying the anti-Semitism that certainly has come out of the far right in Europe and the US, by the way. Are Israelis troubled by it? I would say that, ironically, in the general public, it's a sideshow. Most Israelis really aren't paying attention to every single conference, that Shikli hosts with some of these figures. The last 3 years of war means that Israelis are all consumed. They're all consumed by coping with the war. Many people, obviously, hundreds of thousands of people are in reserve duty, and those families are all struggling to, get by, either whether it's financially, socially, or with their kids. I mean, or dealing with school closures because of the wars with Iran. I mean, there's so many more immediate things that I think that the question of these strategies that look a lot like, PR, posturing, theatrics, are much more a part of what the commentator class talks about. And so I don't really think that they're being embraced that deeply or analyzed that deeply by general society. But on the other hand, that also plays into a gap increasingly where we see general Israeli society talking about how disconnected this government is from their everyday concerns, which probably feeds into why the current coalition and Likud are not doing better.
It seems that it's almost part of this international political strategy. So there's the domestic political play, there's this international political play. And I know that these anti-Semitism conferences abroad, they have been troubling, certainly for some Jewish communities outside of Israel. We've had prominent Jewish leaders boycotting or condemning Shikli and Likud's embrace of figures like Tommy Robinson. But I suppose, well, does this diaspora reaction, does it factor much into Israeli politicians' domestic calculations? Is it, as you say, these are just issues sort of for the commentariat, they're not really issues that sway the elections? Or are they playing two games here? Is there the domestic political play and then the international political play, which is lining up more and more, as far as some analysts say, with the global far-right strategy moving against Islam?
Yeah, I think that Israelis are expressing some concern about the growing rift, first of all, between Israel and the world and Israel's general allies and, the Democratic Party and parts of the Republican Party. But I think they are also somewhat aware, I mean, they're certainly aware of what's going on in the Jewish diaspora, primarily from the perspective that they worry about anti-Semitism abroad. And they have, frankly, the situation is objectively getting worse for Jews in Western countries, but Israelis see it as far worse than it actually even is. And so from their perspective, they're concerned that you can't, walk down the street Jewish in New York, which is not true. But, they are certainly attuned to that. They are less attuned to where the Jewish community is expressing political divisions over Israel. They are aware that there are progressive Jewish communities in general who are critical of Israel's policies. And then again, the issue of Jewish communities who are expressing their concern and caution about people like Shikli hosting people like Tommy Robinson, that gets a little bit in the weeds, but I think they are broadly aware that there is an increasing gap, even as they think, they're very concerned about the fate of, Jews around the world. But I do think they are, if anything, attuned to a gap in Western Jewish communities over Israeli policy, particularly in the US. So they know, for example, we talked about Zohran Mamdani before. And, even in the congressional primary elections, Democratic primary in New York, the coverage is explaining that there are Jews who vote for those candidates as well. So Israelis are left to think, wait, there are candidates out there who are really critical of Israel, and we're covering them as if they're anti-Semitic, but there are Jews voting for them. What does that actually mean? So they're struggling to make sense of some of this, again, with a sort of limited bandwidth given the day-to-day realities here. I think I wouldn't overstate how much they really get into the intricacies of what's going on at each conference, and are American Jews concerned about Shikli inviting those people. I think they're more concerned about whether, for those who support the coalition, they probably believe it's great for Israel to have friends who support Israel, even if they're far right-wingers. The supporters of this government, that 40% roughly, have supported it through everything. So it's going to take a little more than Tommy Robinson to alienate them from a government that was in power on October 7th and has failed on every front that it's tried to fight, Israel's opponents since then.
Dalia Scheinlin, thank you. That was an incredibly comprehensive and really fascinating insight into what's happening in Israel.